Serenade Under the Stars is an evocative title that suggests a romantic or deeply emotional narrative, potentially set in a magical or serene outdoor setting under a starry sky. I'd be happy to outline and begin crafting the story for you, which can then be developed into a longer piece. Writing 5,000 words is quite a large request, and I'll need to approach it in stages. To start, here's a brief summary of the story, and I'll write the first part in detail. Then, you can let me know if you want to continue in that direction. #story summary *. Serenade Under the Stars is a romance about two individuals from very different walks of life who find themselves united through their love of music. Set in a small coastal town, the story explores themes of love, fate, self-discovery, and the healing power of music. One of the characters, a wandering street musician, meets the other, a reserved bookstore owner with a hidden talent for singing. Their worlds collide one magical night when they bond over an impromptu serenade beneath the stars, leading to a journey of discovery and emotional depth. #Serenade Under the Stars. Part I: The Arrival of the Wanderer. The coastal town of Briar's Cove was always quiet in the off-season. Its streets, lined with small shops, cafes, and bookstores, would bustle in the summer, but come autumn, the place became a sanctuary of solitude. The cool sea breeze whispered through the empty lanes, and the sound of waves crashing against the shore was often the only music that echoed through the town. At the center of the town was Starlight Books, a cozy little bookstore owned by Isabella (Izzy) Carson. Starlight had been in her family for generations, a legacy she'd inherited from her grandmother. It had always been her refuge, a place where she could escape into the world of words and stories, away from the complexities of life. Izzy, in her mid-30s, had become something of a fixture in the town. Known for her quiet demeanor and her passion for books, she rarely stepped out of her comfort zone. That is, until the day the wanderer arrived. It was a chilly September evening when Lucas, a musician with no clear destination, first set foot in Briar's Cove. His guitar, worn from years of travel, hung on his back, and his clothes were just as weathered. Lucas had spent years drifting from place to place, playing his music wherever he could, making a living with the melodies that poured from his soul. He had no roots, no family, no attachments. The only thing that tethered him to the world was his music, and even that sometimes felt like it was slipping away. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the town, Lucas found himself wandering down a quiet street. His eyes landed on Starlight Books, the warm light spilling from its windows inviting him in. He wasn't much of a reader, but something about the place called to him. Perhaps it was the sense of peace the shop exuded, or maybe it was just the fact that it was the only place still open. The bell above the door chimed as Lucas stepped inside. Izzy, who had been sorting through a stack of books behind the counter, looked up in surprise. She hadn't expected any customers this late in the evening, especially not someone who looked as out of place as Lucas did. His shaggy brown hair, scruffy beard, and travel-worn clothes made him stand out in a town where most people were familiar faces. "Can I help you?" Izzy asked, her voice soft but cautious. Lucas smiled, his eyes scanning the rows of books. "Just browsing," he replied, his voice carrying a slight rasp, a byproduct of years spent singing on street corners and in smoky bars. Izzy watched him for a moment, unsure what to make of him. There was something about the way he carried himself, confident yet weary, that intrigued her. She hadn't met many people like him in Briar's Cove, and part of her was curious to know his story. After a few moments of silence, Lucas wandered over to the counter. "Do you have any books on music?" he asked. Izzy raised an eyebrow. "Music? You're a musician." Lucas chuckled. "Something like that." She gestured toward a small section in the corner of the store. "We don't have much, but there are a few books over there on music theory and history." Lucas nodded and made his way over to the shelf. As he perused the titles, he couldn't help but notice the grand piano tucked away in the corner of the store, partially hidden by a stack of books. It was an old instrument, its wood polished to a gleam, though the keys looked like they hadn't been touched in years. "Do you play?" Lucas asked, glancing back at Izzy. She hesitated, her eyes flickering to the piano. "Not in a long time," she admitted. "It was my grandmother's. She used to play every evening, serenading the neighborhood from this very store." Lucas's interest was piqued. "And you? Don't you play?" Izzy looked away, her expression guarded. "I used to. But that was a long time ago." There was something in her tone, a quiet sadness that made Lucas pause. He didn't push her further, sensing that there was a story behind her reluctance to play. Instead, he smiled and picked up a book on jazz legends, flipping through the pages. "Music's a funny thing, isn't it?" he said after a moment. "It has this way of bringing people together, even when they're worlds apart." Izzy looked at him curiously. "You think so?" Lucas nodded. "It's the one language everyone understands. No matter where you go, people respond to music. It's like a universal truth." His words resonated with Izzy more than she cared to admit. She had always loved music, but somewhere along the way, she'd let that love slip away. Life had a funny way of pulling you away from the things that once brought you joy. Lucas set the book back on the shelf and turned to her with a mischievous grin. "How about a deal? I'll play you a song, and if you like it, you have to play something for me in return." Izzy blinked, taken aback by the offer. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Come on," Lucas urged, his voice light and teasing. "What have you got to lose?" She stared at him for a long moment, torn between the safety of her routine and the temptation of something new, something unpredictable. Before she could overthink it, she found herself nodding. Lucas's grin widened as he swung his guitar off his back and settled onto one of the chairs by the window. He strummed a few chords, adjusting the tuning until the sound was just right. Then, without another word, he began to play. The first notes were soft and slow, filling the room with a gentle melody that seemed to echo the rhythm of the ocean outside. Lucas's voice, low and gravelly, joined the music, weaving a story of love and loss, of dreams and wanderings. It was a song that spoke of yearning, of searching for something just out of reach. As Izzy listened, something stirred inside her, a long-buried longing she hadn't felt in years. The music wrapped around her like a warm embrace, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to be swept away by it. When the song ended, the silence that followed felt heavy, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Lucas looked up at her, his eyes searching her face for a reaction.